Hey everybody, welcome to our webinars. My name is Lindsay Nielsen. I'm the marketing coordinator at Eco Engineers, and this is the third of our quarterly webinars on the electric vehicle market. And this one will feature panelists who work in the field. We're excited to be presenting this information to you, and I hope you enjoy the topic. Let's do a few housekeeping items before we start. Similar to our past panel webinars, a portion of this has been pre-recorded. So the experts will all be live at the end of the presentation for a Q&A, and you're welcome to ask questions throughout the webinar in the questions chat function. And as usual, there will be a short survey sent out after the close of today's event. Please tell us how we did, and if you have any suggestions for future webinars, we're more than happy to take them. All right, so let's get started.
Carbon is the biggest disruptor of the 21st century, and the world as we know it is changing. Eco Engineers can guide you to make the best decisions as you navigate toward your clean energy goals. Our diverse team of carbon analysts, engineers, scientists, auditors, and regulatory specialists are trusted advisors of the clean energy fuel sectors worldwide. Clean energy regulations are a maze. We simplify them with an unbiased approach and fully manage your compliance. Modeling your carbon reduction is complicated. We quantify your emissions with a rigor based in science. Together, we can create markets that will protect and grow your investment. We create sustainable solutions for a better tomorrow. We are Eco Engineers.
Hi, I'm Shashi Menon, the CEO of Eco Engineers. That video you just saw is Eco Engineers in a nutshell. We're a team of consultants, auditors, engineers, and scientists with deep expertise in low carbon fuels, emerging technologies, and policies that are helping decarbonize the world. We are at the heart of the energy transition. At Eco Engineers, we are laser focused on aiding, assisting, and supporting this transition to a clean energy economy. Through our education programs, our science-based approach to life cycle carbon analysis, through our asset development support, our engagement with policymakers, and through our compliance management and auditing teams, we provide a 360 approach to usher in the clean energy transition. The ultimate success of low carbon fuel projects and ultimately the future of our planet depends on the successful execution of net zero goals. And that's exactly what our team is here to help you do. Thank you.
Thank you, Shashi, for that company overview. Just to drill down a little bit on the services we offer, though, in electric vehicles, our goal is to guide property owners, operators, fleet owners, and transportation planners through the process of rolling out new or expanding their existing EV infrastructure. We do this by assessing your fleet needs, understanding all the use cases, the schedules, the operations, and then providing a due diligence on the economic and environmental aspects. This leads us to determining what infrastructure is needed to charge those vehicles and going through locating funding sources and future-proofing that plan, and then bringing it all together in an EV plan that really addresses the vehicles, the users, and the infrastructure needs in one comprehensive rollout plan. That way the organization can understand the investment and the payback. One of the ways that we've been helping organizations on this journey is to provide this 2021 EV webinar series that you're listening to right now. Today's webinar is the third quarterly installment of the series. You can view the previous two webinars on the Eco Engineers YouTube channel or from our website. And the final installment of this year's series will be on December 9th, and it will be our Crystal Ball series looking into the future growth into next year. So today's panel, we have a really nice array of speakers here, a wide representation of the EV industry. First, we'll hear from Cameron Wolf, who will discuss the total cost of ownership of electric vehicles. And then Paul Young will give us the insights on how to charge those vehicles. JC Porter has a great perspective as a manager of a large organization, a university setting, and how the owner or operator looks at EV planning. And then finally, to round out our panel, we'll hear from Patrick Surface to provide an overview of the US Renewable Fuel Standard and the prospect of this economic tool opening up to electric vehicles in the near future. So let's move on to our first speaker. Welcome, Cameron from ZappyRide. We have a great tool here available that Cameron's going to present on assessing the total cost of ownership for electrification of your vehicles. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Dan. I appreciate being here. Appreciate you guys bringing me on and looking forward to showing off the benefits of EVs. Here to show our total cost of ownership tool that we host on a multitude of websites. Basically, we're just in the business of showing that EVs can be cheaper and are cheaper than ICE vehicles, especially for fleet managers and FMCs. So a little bit about our tool. We take the different vehicle data from a variety of sources, and we white label these tools for utilities, automakers, anyone that's really interested in the electrification scene. Obviously, this is more on the consumer side, but we also track vehicle data for fleets as well. If you see here on the site, you can see after incentive cost of vehicles. You can have a bunch of different tools you can play with. Check your different inputs to see how far you're driving, your budget, anything you could possibly want. And it kind of gives you the fully transparent cost of adopting an electric vehicle. Obviously, carry OEM specific information for the consumer side. We'll get more into the fleet side a little bit later. But one of the main features here, as far as going to help companies get to net zero, is we talk about the level of CO2 emissions reduced. That's really big, kind of, if you're trying to get to that net zero carbon goal. Also show trees planted to kind of further bolster that. We also talk about gasoline saved per year. And if you see here, one of the cool things is we take in estimated incentives per vehicle purchase. So that's more of a hyper local piece of data. One feature of these tools is it shows how much it costs to fill up monthly for charging and gas. So it takes similarly classed vehicles. So in this case, a Toyota Supra compared to a Model 3, and usually uses price point as the comparison. Obviously, you can see that the Supra uses considerably more fuel, more expensive as well. And this brings in average level 2 charging rates per year utility. So it costs you about $55 a month to fill up at your house. And this one also is really cool. It shows the total cost of ownership, and it takes in net incentives, resale value, electricity used, gas, maintenance, and insurance. Model 3 over 5 years is $418 cheaper. Obviously, this is a higher end EV, so it'll be a little different per vehicle you choose. One of the really cool parts of our tool is it takes all of the tax credits, rebates. I previously mentioned that in the slide prior. It brings in federal, utility grants, so really cool from a local perspective, and it also features state grants. We have a team of 5 people that are consistently updating these grants. So if you ever want to go back to the site and see if there's updated grants for your needs, feel free. I mean, it's always updating. And we get into the fleet side of things. So what's really cool about this tool is a fleet manager or an FMC can get in this tool, and it's hosted on a utility site, so they'd have to work closely with their utility, which is very important, mind you. They could get on this site and basically fill out a drop-down box of every possible vehicle from class 1 to class 8. There's everything on here. So as far as going school buses, for instance, this will explain to you the OEM of the school bus. It'll give you the range, the miles per kilowatt hour, charging behaviors, and the equivalent for running diesel on a fossil fuel vehicle. So as you can see here, 6 miles per gallon on diesel would be the equivalent for a bus of this nature. What gets really cool is you can choose the amount of fleet vehicles you'd like to include. So let's say you had 3 buses that you're looking to buy and the average miles that you're looking to use it per day. So you throw the days of operation in there. And since I'm constraining the screenshots, a little bit below this tool would be the charging behavior. So you can choose the times you'd like it to charge, what kind of charger you want to use, and if it's a even approach to doing that, or if there's more of a sporadic approach. In this case, you have 3 buses charging from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. with level 2. It'll tell you that the batteries will be depleted. So you can have custom charging times, even a different charger, and it'll give you 100% accurate information on how batteries will be used, depleted, and taken care of in a fleet, which is really neat. This kind of gives you an idea. So on the 3 buses that you selected, it'll show you how much gas you'll save. Obviously, electric is a little bit cheaper to charge than fueling up with diesel fuel. And it kind of goes here and shows that you can save $76,000 per year. Another cool feature of this tool is it shows hourly energy charges. So if you'd like to work with your utility to decipher and determine a time of use rate plan, is obviously cheaper when there's off-peak hours. So as you can see at the bottom of this grid, from 12 a.m. to 2 a.m. is usually the best time to charge, is because less people are using the grid. It also shows load patterns, how often you'd be using electricity, what days of the week. So you can really get a very clear comparison on what you'd be doing. And this helps with program administration, helping build out your fleet. Basically answers all the questions people might have. I just actually was at the AFLA conference, and remarketing was a huge topic of conversation. A lot of people are getting EVs right now. They're not sure of how the battery degradation plays into the resale cost. This information, we took 4 different vehicles for you just to kind of show you a variety of different archetypes. And it shows you the value of depreciation over time. Obviously, you can see that EVs hold a much different level of depreciation and resale value than fossil fuel trucks. And it's just kind of good to see all the different lines of comparison. I mean, it assumes a straight line depreciation, doesn't account for any tax treatment, which is, obviously something that will develop over time. But as far as maintenance costs are concerned, fueling costs, this really has an effect on depreciation resale. And one of my favorite, like I said, from the commercial side or the consumer side of things would be the grant eligibility. It shows every possible grant you can get. So pulled data from California here because they're very good with their grants. It has how they're eligible, which is awesome. No other tool does this right now as far as showing why these vehicles qualify and how they qualify. It even goes into why they don't qualify. So it takes utility level data and shows why they don't qualify, which is super cool. If you're looking to get to a certain grant, it'll give you kind of information on how to get to that grant to be eligible for it. And even more interesting is it has an an incentive application assistant, which will help people apply to get that money, which is a huge obstacle. Also learn that in AFLA, people know the grants are out there. They just don't know how many or how to get the money. And there are 361 right now, in case you're asking. That's how many we track. So overall, this tool takes a plethora of information, whether that be from going net zero, whether that be from total cost saved, whether that be from putting unlimited different fleet vehicles together. It really brings everything full circle. It shows the total amount saved, even down to the construction level. So we help find contractors if need be. So it truly is an all-in-one tool that will immensely help with the planning process. And like I said, it's all white labeled. So we work like with utilities, OEMs, and different organizations that really want to help with electrification. And I know that if I was to do a screen share of this, it would have taken me much longer than the allocated time. So if you guys want to check it out on your own, feel free to go to fleets.pge.com. We work very closely with Pacific Gas and Electric, and they are a phenomenal partner in this. They definitely share a good vision for electrification.
Great, Cameron. That's a fantastic tool. Very powerful. I like how it incorporates the total cost of ownership along with environmental and grants and how to finance it up front. You have this wealth of data that you've accumulated in your database. I'm wondering if you've been able to, as a company, kind of dissect that as a whole on a macro level to see if there are any specific trends that you can point to in terms of electrification, whether it be total cost of ownership or environmental impact, or are there any kind of general things that you've pulled out of having all of this data?
Yeah, Dan, I think you hit it right in the head with those 2 bullet points. Obviously, the biggest trend that we've noticed is that EVs are definitely the way to go. I think fleet managers and FMCs especially are really starting to realize this. It's just a matter of putting all the dots together and crossing the T's. I think people just don't necessarily have a clear plan on how to electrify yet. You'd be surprised that some people don't closely work with utilities involved, and utilities might be one of the biggest players in this electrification plan. They have levels of program administration. There's just a lot of things that people don't know about it yet. They know it's a good idea, but they just don't know how to get there. And that's probably one of the biggest pieces of data that we've really accumulated. It's not even data itself. You can see just based on this tool that they are cheaper to own. As far as carbon emissions are concerned, obviously that does wonders for helping your carbon footprint as a company. Like I said, going net zero is a big priority for a lot of companies right now. And this tool can kind of paint that picture of how you're going to reduce your emissions. So yeah, it provides a lot of information, both on a macro and micro level.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you very much for joining us and sharing this tool. The website you pointed to is Pacific Gas and Electric, correct? So that would be an example of where users in California can look up their vehicles, and you're available elsewhere as well.
So we have a variety of utilities that we work with that take some of our information. Right now, Pacific Gas and Electric is the only one where the fleet tool of that nature is live, but we are closely working with other utilities to bring something similar to their program on board. So for now, if you'd like to check out fleets.pge.com, that's the place to see the tool that I just pulled information from.
Thank you very much, Cameron. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate you having me.
Now that we heard from Cameron to discuss the cars and how to assess your automobile fleet and how to electrify your fleet, but a big question remains as to how you would charge those vehicles. So for that, we have the VP of Sales from Juice Bar, Paul Young, and he's going to discuss the EV charging infrastructure for us. Paul, welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you, Lindsay, for your time and preparations for this call. I'm honored to be here to help out and spread the word. The EV charging infrastructure build is going on right now, and I'm here to help. I represent Juice Bar EV Charging. We're a 15-year-old company. We build our stations right here in Connecticut, USA. We have the safest units on the market thanks to our proprietary dual contactor technology. We have an awesome patented cord retraction system that keeps those handles and cords up off the ground. Our units are all aluminum, therefore can stand whatever the elements will bring them. And we also have multiple software options, which is a very important thing for any EV charging host to consider. It's nice to have different options, whether you're running a fleet, open to the public, have a multifamily community, all of those different scenarios or use cases, we say, have different solutions. We're happy to bring a custom fit one to you. What can businesses and municipalities do to support the EV revolution that is here? Well, the U.S. infrastructure is expanding rapidly. The opportunity here is to grow to 13 million charging stations by 2030. 90% of those will be level 2 chargers. That's 208, 220, like your kitchen range or a clothes dryer. And the locations will be where people live, work, and sleep. Businesses and munis must add EV infrastructure. It's no longer a nice to have. You really need to do this, folks. Great news, utility programs, where and when available, can cover up to 100% of the infrastructure and equipment costs. How about the money part? How would a municipality fund EV charging? You have your cost of electricity. You also have your cost of equipment. You can lease equipment and therefore spread that capital expense out. And I have different numbers here for the different levels of output units. Point here is you can cover your cost of equipment in your first 3.5 hours of charging, or even 2 hours and 45 minutes for the 40 amp unit. Your cost of electricity will be covered by the use of the software. And by adding a little margin on top of that cost of electricity, you cover your cost of goods. What additional benefits are possible by adding EV charging? Well, there are many. Some are soft and some are immediate. I'll cover both. How about US Green Building Council LEED and Park Smart certification credits? Also, annual report sustainability stats, community EV awareness, your employees and your residents' benefits. They will come and rent or work with you thanks to having the EV charging on site. You're saving the environment, your green community status, you're going to attract and retain tenants. You're actually going to enhance your brand by being identified as supporting EV drivers. Also, your fleets can significantly reduce your operating expenses, whether that be for maintenance of the vehicles or replacing the gasoline or diesel that you're currently pumping into those fleet vehicles.
Great, thank you, Paul. That was excellent. I really like that slide where you showed the side-by-side comparisons and the payback time for different types of charging stations. Yeah, that one. That bottom line, essentially, if I'm interpreting that correctly, roughly 3 hours of charging a day will pay for your equipment, and anything more than that would be profit. Um, is that correct, the way I'm interpreting that? And that's essentially one charge a day, right? A car comes in and probably charges an average of 2, 3, 4 hours a day.
Correct. And that is when you're set up on a lease program. You can lay out the capital expense upfront if the municipality has it in their budget or they have some funds available. And then you will simply be chipping away at that CapEx. The lease spreads out that cost over 5 years. So if you do purchase direct, it'll take a little bit longer before you clear it, but then once you do, your cost of goods goes away and you're simply covering electricity and software after that point.
That's great. And then you mentioned there are different types of software. So I know our audience is made up of a wide range of different types of people, and some folks may want to have free charging, and some may want to charge with a credit card swipe, and sort of have it a publicly accessible station. And then I think you mentioned that you also have support for having a fleet, so like a closed system, right, where you might have an RFID access card or some other means of turning the station on. Are those the sort of the main use cases? You'd either have it open, you'd have a limited access, or you'd have public access.
Correct. And we can easily help each of you on this call. Thanks for attending with that setup. And that's where having software options comes in handy. You may not need all of that, all those bells and whistles in a system like the AMP Up system that has reservation capabilities. Well, if you're running a municipal fleet and they're just municipal employees utilizing it, then you could simply go with a lighter version, less costly to run the software each month, and identify each driver by a key fob. So they simply scan the fob and charge their car.
That's excellent. Those are some great options, great solutions. I think it was your last slide, you mentioned the soft benefits. I often speak of secondary benefits to folks for any new technology. It's one thing to look at that immediate payback, but it's so powerful when you think of the additional benefits that you achieve with moving to a new technology or product. And you captured that nicely. There's a lot of sort of green benefits there, being able to attract new business. Do you have any, examples that you can cite that that you've had folks that didn't have any EV charging, they brought in EV charging and have a good positive benefit from that?
Sure. Multifamily communities are a good example where they all of a sudden, I call it the bird feeder effect, by simply placing charging stations on property. All of a sudden, people come out of nowhere. They want to live there. And if it's a mixed use facility, the restaurant all of a sudden is getting busier because while these cars are charging, people are looking for something to do with their dwell time. And that may be eat at the high-end diner across the street, go to the library if you're right next to the community center, let's say. So all of those different things come with adding EV support outside of your property or your building.
Super. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Paul. That was great information and really kind of rounds out the, if you have the vehicle, you need to charge the vehicle. So what are those solutions there? It's good to see there's a wide variety of solutions to meet the different
There are, and I'm
folks.
happy to be a resource for each of you as you jump into this service. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you very much. I'd like to introduce as our next guest speaker, J.C. Porter. He's with Arizona State University. He's the Associate Director of Commuter Services, and will be providing a perspective of an EV charging infrastructure owner and operator, as he has quite a number of facilities and number of stakeholders under his care. JC, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Van. Yeah, thanks for giving me the opportunity to kind of talk about what ASU is doing, maybe a little bit of lessons learned we've been able to figure out throughout the years that we've been getting into the EV charging and kind of how it's working and what's happening on campus. So just a little background for ASU is we've been retrofitting a lot of our campus and garages with EV chargers. And then most recently, we're able to build a brand new parking structure that we have over 20 chargers in it currently, with pre-plumbed with even, I believe, up to 30 more chargers we can do. So the lesson learned that we kind of take away from this is that if you are building a garage, definitely pre-plumb as much as you think you're going to need. That definitely saves a lot of time and energy when you're doing that. What we found is with our older garages, as we're retrofitting, we're running a lot of conduit, a lot of cable, and then kind of having to create more electrical boxes and kind of pull a lot more power than what the garage was originally set for. So when you're looking to build a garage, make sure you take all of that into account for what your future plans are to make sure you future-proof it, but then at the same time allow for what your current needs are. And that's something that ASU it has been trying to do, is we've been trying to figure out the chicken and the egg scenario, so to speak. So at ASU, we really were working on being carbon neutral by 2035 with transportation. So that's a big goal and mission of Arizona State University, is to reduce our carbon footprint. So we thought, okay, if we get charging stations, that's really going to help incentivize our faculty, staff, and students to get out of the gas cars and move towards electric vehicles. One thing that we found after installing a lot of charging stations all throughout our 4 different campuses and throughout our surface parking lot and garages, and we've even installed level 1 charging stations, a simple plug-in that's painted for charging, and then also a lot of level 2 charging stations, is that we haven't seen the growth of the electric vehicles on campus. And kind of what we're seeing why this issue is because we're right next to California, and we're seeing a lot of the EV vehicles heading to California, and we're kind of getting second dibs on a lot of electric vehicles. And so they're kind of difficult to find here in Arizona. So that's one thing where I think it's good and bad, because we're able to get ahead of the car charging demand by installing all these chargers throughout our campuses. But at the same time, we're not seeing the utilization that we'd hoped, which is also, again, kind of a bonus that we're finding, is as ASU is working to electrify our campus fleet, we're moving that direction. And one of the biggest hindrances a lot of companies run into when they're trying to electrify their fleet is, where do you charge them? And then installing that infrastructure. So the good thing is as we're looking to change all of our gas vehicle into electric fleet vehicles, that we already have all the charging infrastructure in place. And the really good thing is we can actually utilize the same charging infrastructure we have in place for the visitors for our fleet vehicles, because our fleet vehicles are going to be charging at night when we see pretty much zero utilization in our chargers at night, because everybody kind of charges during the day while they're at work or going to class. So I think that's kind of one thing that we kind of fell into serendipitously by installing all these chargers all throughout our campuses, is now as we go to electrify our fleet, we actually have charging infrastructure already in place. So I think the only thing that's slowing us down from charging the fleet vehicles more than we have is again, just the access to the electric vehicles and trying to get that, which is coming, especially with the pickup trucks being electrified. We have a lot of pickup trucks on campus. We use a lot of carts, electric carts on campus. And then we also change into a lot of vehicles. So parking and transportation, I actually just purchased 2 Chevy Bolts, and that's what we're using for our license plate recognition to go around our campus to enforce permits and those types of things. So we're really excited about that incentive, and ASU's continuing to grow. Maybe just one quick thing, I'll scroll down and kind of show some areas of kind of what our level 1 kind of costs and kind of what that looks like and what we're charging. And maybe that's something that is a little different from what other states do, is we can't provide the electricity for free. We have to charge for it because we're a state entity. And so we've been charging for electricity. We have both level 1 and level 2 costs to go along with that. And then again, kind of here's a map of our level 2 locations, and kind of you can see where we have it. And as you can see, this is just the Tempe campus. We've also done this at our other 3 campuses too, is pretty much strategically place our electric charging all throughout the campus so that we don't have any areas where there's difficulty in finding it. So I think that's one thing that we've done really well as a team. So with that, Dan, maybe I'll turn that back over to you and see if there's any questions you'd like to ask me.
That's a great overview and a really interesting problem that you have, both problem and benefit, I guess, that the supply chain is restricting the vehicles, so you're not seeing the actual vehicles appearing yet, but you know they're coming. You moved from well, you mentioned that your fleet, your Arizona State University fleet is changing to electrification. What do you have for a goal on campus? Is that the 2035? You'll be all electric by that point?
We're shooting for quicker than that. So actually, every vehicle that we purchase new is going to be all electric, unless it gets a special sign off because there's not an electric option available. Something that we're really moving towards really quickly is to kind of electrify that fleet as soon as possible. And every vehicle we purchase, and we're actually doing studies right now to kind of look at what vehicles can be replaced by electric based on kind of the mileage and distance they go. And what we're finding is a lot of our cars, probably almost 100% of them, don't go more than an average electric car will travel in a day.
Lisa, you mentioned expanding from about 20 stations up to 80 plus, and plans to open several more stations over the next year or two. I think you at one point said 100 or more. That's a particular challenge, and what have you done as an organization to do the planning for that, both from the technical side, but also to understand where the need is to put those stations? When you get to that number of stations, you have to do a lot more planning.
Yeah, so the good thing is with the new garages that we're building, is we're really looking towards the GPCI Park Smart garage certification to kind of give us the kind of what the necessary amount of charging per garage is, and we're able to meet that goal. But of course, our newest garage that's went online is also connected to our newest building that's going to house our sustainability department in. And what they're really seeing is they really want to ramp it up to over 200 charging stations in an 1,800 stall garage. And so that's something that we'll eventually get to that point. But I think, again, everything comes at a cost. So that's really what we weigh, kind of how much more infrastructure we're going to put in, is make sure we get the utilization that is there as we move forward. And kind of Dan, that was a great question about how do we figure out where to put them or how to put them, is we basically looked at every single parking area and kind of the utilization of those areas. And that's where we kind of decided where and how to put it. And then in some areas was actually dictated based on whether or not we're putting in a new surface parking lot or some other construction that was going on at that same time, to be able to kind of work together and only dig it up once, so to speak, so that we're kind of working in concert with everybody else and pulling wire, putting down conduit. And that's one thing that we've started to do moving forward, is anytime something gets dug up or we know we want to put something there, we'll run some conduit just so we can be ready to go when we need to add more charging stations. So we just have to put up the electrical box, pull the wire, and then install the charging station, and we're off and running.
Yeah, with that in mind, on the planning side, did you work with the city and the municipality or any local businesses as well, or did you just do all the planning strictly from an ASU perspective?
We try to work with everybody wherever we can. So we're actually working with our local utilities too, because a lot of our utilities here in Arizona are trying to promote electric car charging also. So working with them on grants and kind of making sure that we're all working again in concert to, hey, maybe we need to put up a bigger utility area in this area because we're going to have a lot more power draw, and what's that going to look like, and how do we work with the utility to make sure that everything has enough power to be able to run what we want to run for in the future, and then also what we're planning to do right now. And so we we're not afraid to partner or work with anybody. And that's kind of what we try to do, is make sure that as many people as we can we'll work with and try to get the best product possible for Arizona State University and also the community that we're within.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for your time, JC. I think you've packed a lot of good lessons learned and advice into a short time here. And from the perspective of an owner or operator, I think that's really critical to lean on others who have gone through it and be able to learn from that. So thank you for sharing your thoughts.
Well, anytime, Dan. And yeah, if anybody has any other questions, feel free to reach out to me. Be happy to answer any of them.
Our next and final speaker, we will hear from Patrick Surface, the Executive Director of the American Biogas Council. Patrick is here to introduce the topic of eRINs, which is a very powerful economic tool to drive electric mobility adoption. Patrick, welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, and thank you to Eco Engineers for putting on this webinar. We spend a lot of time in the biogas world talking about renewable natural gas these days, which is when you take biogas and you upgrade it to natural gas pipeline quality. And even though there are a lot of biogas projects generating electricity in the US, we spend less time talking about electricity and electric vehicles, and that is changing. And I'll tell you why. So just so you know who we are the trade association that represents the entire biogas industry in the US and all the people that make biogas, create biogas projects, and own those projects and provide services to the industry. So what is a biogas system? A biogas system is basically a tank that recycles organic material. And if you look at the top and the circles, those are the kinds of feedstocks that feed into the tank. You'll see the tank in the middle there, the digester, the anaerobic digester. And it has microbes, all this feedstock that's there has microbes in it. And if you create a nice warm environment that's stirred just a little bit, just enough, then those microbes reproduce and they eat up the organic material and they burp out methane. And methane is the primary constituent of natural gas. And so you can use biogas process to do any of the kinds of things that you can with natural gas, like making electricity or like making hydrogen. And if you can make hydrogen and electricity, then you can fuel electric vehicles. So if you look at all the different products at the bottom there that can come from a biogas system, we're going to be talking today about the electricity and the vehicle fuel side of it. And just to remind you, when we say electric vehicles, we do mean both battery electric vehicles and hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicles. Both of those can be generated from biogas. You can go biogas to an engine, microturbine, or fuel cell to generate electricity to go into a battery electric vehicle, or you can go biogas to hydrogen to a fuel cell electric vehicle. And we have companies in our industry that are doing both of those today, which is really exciting. So I'm going to focus on how to make some money out of doing that, how to take advantage of some programs that will help you to do that. Here's just a picture of a biogas system. This happens to be one in Michigan. As you might guess, it's fed by dairy manure. That's the primary feedstock going into this one. And this photographer did a great job of capturing those beautiful women in the front with the digester in the background. So here is the landscape of the US biogas industry. We have biogas systems in all 50 states. And if you look at the numbers on the upper left there, that's how the 2,200 operational biogas systems that we have around the country are broken down. And you'll see most of them are at wastewater facilities. And primarily the two things that you turn your biogas, that you produce from your biogas system the most these days are either electricity or renewable natural gas. And if you look at that big dark blue circle in the center there, we've got the total number of renewable natural gas or RNG projects in the US. So only about 200 out of the 2,200 systems. It happens to be the fastest growing segment of the industry. But the important thing for this topic today is that there are basically 2,000 operational systems around the country that are already producing electricity. Most of the time that electricity just goes to the grid in terms of net metering, but the potential for that electricity to go to electric vehicles is huge, and that's what we're focusing on today. So in addition to those 2,000 operational systems already producing biogas, we've got the potential for 15,000 new systems. And that potential really comes from the fact that there is just, frankly, a lot of organic material out there that is hardly being recycled. Food waste, wastewater sludge, the manure and the waste from animal processing. This is all the opportunity to recycle that into biogas and other energy and soil products. And in addition to that potential from organic waste and that huge volume, we have lots of policy drivers in the industry that are also helping to create that growth. And in the big circle there is the biggest driver for the industry. We've got the federal renewable fuel standard and the California-based low carbon fuel standard. And together, if you can develop a project that can use the credits and the incentives from both of those programs, your biogas, which if you were just displacing conventional natural gas, might be worth $3 for every million BTU. With these incentives and these programs, that $3 gas can then become worth $9 to $90 for every million BTU. And that, of course, is a game changer for the industry. And these are parts of the programs that electric vehicle and biogas projects can take advantage of. So let's get into that. This relatively boring chart is just to show you from the EPA website. So EPA oversees that federal renewable fuel standard, which I'm mostly focusing on right now. And this pathway to go to renewable electricity from biogas already exists. So the pathway exists, but we don't have any, and there's another pathway here. There's actually two different pathways in the renewable fuel standard to generate renewable electricity. So the pathway exists. Why aren't we doing more of this today? And the main reason for that, and this chart doesn't show up, but the main reason is because EPA has not approved the first project to generate eRINs. We have an existing pathway. We have dozens of projects sitting on EPA's desk, and they haven't approved the first projects yet. And if you look at where eRINs would fit here, it would be in the royal blue line in the middle there, and even the light blue lines on the top there. You can barely see them in the context of renewable diesel and ethanol because there's just so much of those other fuels. So we're kind of a drop in the bucket, so to speak, in the entire renewable fuel standard. But we're also the fastest growing segment. So if you type out that little royal blue sliver in that last graph there for renewable natural gas, this is the growth of that segment. And it's in this same pathway that renewable electricity can participate. And so basically what you're doing in this program is you're generating these credits for every gallon of gasoline equivalent. And in the case of electricity, it's one credit instead of for every gallon of fuel or gallon of RNG, you're getting one credit for every 22.6 kilowatt hours that's produced and goes into a vehicle, whether that's in the form of electricity or hydrogen. So here's the growth of the existing pathway for renewable natural gas, where electricity is not yet participating, but should be. And here's what it looks like when we add in those electricity credits as soon as EPA starts processing the first projects, which we expect to happen very, very soon. It will double. I just added the potential for eRINs onto the last year of RNG production, so onto 2020, and it doubles the actual production of renewable fuel going into this program. And that's really important because the value of these credits changes because it's a market-based program. Those credits can go up and down. And the more volume we have in the program, and the more volume we have in this pathway, the more stable those credit values will be, which is better for investment. And then, of course, the more revenue you can produce. How much more revenue? Well, our 501 million eRINs, which is what we think could be produced here within the renewable electricity pathway. If you assume that D3 RINs are about $3.13, and EcoEngineers does an awesome job of sending out price updates every evening. So I got these from yesterday's email that they sent me. $3.13 for the D3 RIN, $1.50 for the D5 RIN. There's different kinds of credits that you can get in this program. And let's assume 22.6 kilowatt hours per eRIN. By the way, that number should be much less, but that's what EPA is using right now. Electric vehicles are a lot more efficient than this. We're talking about generating basically between $1 billion and $1.5 billion new dollars of gross revenue onto these projects, in addition to any other project revenue that would be generated. And if you look at that on a per mile basis, and you assume that 22.6 kilowatt hours is putting an EV down the road about 70 miles, we're looking about 2 to 4.5 cents per mile of gross revenue. Now, this revenue is going to need to be split up amongst your project partners, but there's some money there to take advantage of. And finally, I'm just going to tease you with one last thing here, which is remember I mentioned that there's a federal renewable fuel standard, which we've just been talking about, but there's also a California low carbon fuel standard program. And if you can stack those credits together, that's where you get that $9 to $90 per million BTUs compared to $3 natural gas. Everything in the blue box here is biogas related, and the EV part of these projects is the yellow bar. And this graph is looking at the carbon intensity of all kinds of renewable fuel projects, from conventional natural gas and ethanol and renewable diesel to solar and wind EV to biogas EV and more. And look at which ones have the lowest carbon intensity, which is the best, right? You want to have the lowest carbon. It's negative. That's the biogas to EV segment. And that means that you can generate more credits than any of these other renewable fuels, and more credits means additional revenue, even in addition to the RFS. And we actually have projects that are using this program today, a couple in California that are taking dairy manure to go to biogas, to a fuel cell, to electricity, to electric vehicles, generating these credits today. So 2 programs, the Renewable Fuel Standard and eRINs, and also the California LCFS. We've got some work to do on the EPA side to get these projects started. EPA needs to do their work basically, but there's a huge potential out there that we expect to be coming through really soon.
Thank you, Patrick. That was a lot of information, and really that's an exciting development to think about the possibility there. I mean, the numbers that stuck out to me were $1.5 billion of opportunity here for electric vehicles, and you had 2 to 4.5 cents per mile basically driven, and that really puts a clear picture on the potential opportunity here. Do we have any indication as to any indicators from the EPA as to when this might be available, or when they might be ruling on this?
Yeah, we actually do have some indication recently, and it's really good news because it's been really frustrating to have dozens of these applications for biogas to electric vehicle projects sitting on EPA's desk for years, actually. But we got some news very recently that they are working on a new proposed rule that will pave the way for the first projects to be approved maybe as soon as next year. We expect a new proposed rule to come out in early 2022, so the first quarter, so in a couple months. Then they'll take comments on it, and then they'll finalize that rule, and then we would expect EPA to start processing those first registrations, those first projects that they already have sitting on their desk. So in the most optimistic sense, we could see eRINs possibly being generated next summer. I think it'll probably be more like late 2022, and of course that assumes that we don't have any significant delays, which are also possible and happen all the time, especially in our government. So that's the current best news, and it's great news to see real evidence that EPA is really working on this and moving things ahead so that they can start processing those first projects, and we can, as an industry, start generating those eRINs, start generating that revenue to start powering more electric vehicles with renewable fuel and get more biogas systems built.
That is fantastic news. That's a big pool of money. Do we have any sense as to how that will be controlled or allocated, or who will have the rights to that, or is that going to be up to the individual project developers to kind of determine how that money flows through the different entities, the electric car driver, the EV charging station owner, the utility? Everyone, I'm sure, is going to want to take part in that.
Yeah, and each one of those entities can probably make a claim that without them in the chain, you don't have a full project. Good piece of news about the Renewable Fuel Standard is that EPA allows each project to decide which entity generates the RINs, and then among those project organizations, the entities involved in the project, they decide internally how that revenue gets split. So it's really up to the project to decide. And by project, I mean everyone from the production of the biogas to whoever's controlling the charging or the fueling to get the electrons or get the hydrogen into the vehicles. Everyone in that chain registers as one group to the EPA, and then within that group, they decide how the eRIN revenue is generated and split.
That sounds like it's going to allow a lot of flexibility, and that in turn, I think will spur innovation in terms of how it gets executed, and that's probably a good thing rather than having the rules up front.
We
Thank you
expect
very
that.
much.
They could change things with the rule. We just expecting that based on that's the precedent that they're already using with RNG. And so it'd be highly unusual for EPA to change directions when there's so much precedent ahead of it. But you know, anything could happen.
Thank you very much, Patrick. I appreciate your time and joining us today.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
Now let's open questions up to the wider panel and take some general questions from our audience. At this time, I'd like to invite all of our panelists to turn their cameras on. And a welcome to the audience, please, to submit any questions you have for our panel using the question box on GoToMeeting. I'd like to start off here with a general question to the members of the panel, and we can go in the order that you presented. So Cameron first, but what are one or two main points you'd like to recommend for an organization to consider in terms of planning for their EV transition, or if they've already got a start on this, you know, they're looking at possibly expanding in 10 or X or more type of expansion. And similar for Patrick, how can an organization plan for the potential of those eRINs? So if you put yourself in an organization's shoes, whether it's a municipality or university, airport, business, I'll hand that over. Let's start with Cameron.
Yeah, I think I'm going to work on JC's point where they work closely with a lot of different organizations. I think being able to work with your utility is extremely important here. You know, just as from a standpoint of kind of seeing what's out there as far as grants, incentives, and just closely working with as many agencies, whether it be municipality, state level, whatever you can really to get everyone to be your ally.
Great, thanks.
I think from our side, the key is we have a lot of biogas projects, as you saw, that are already generating electricity. I think from the EV side of things, the key is you need to start getting in touch with some of those projects and seeing if they're interested in developing a contract with you so that their electrons from those biogas systems or the hydrogen can get to your vehicles so that when eRINs are generated, you're ready to work with one or more organizations because they will need you. They will need the electric vehicles in order to complete that chain and complete a project registration.
Super. Paul or JC, do you have any thoughts on considerations for expansion?
I was gonna say start. I think that's the hardest part is getting going. But once you get going, I think follow what everybody else said before is partner as much as you can. There's a lot of help out there to get you started. I think the hardest part, to be honest with you, is just either getting started or keeping the momentum going.
Yeah, thanks, JC. I agree 100%. You just have to jump in. You don't have to go into the deep end of the pool. You just have to start.
Great. We're getting quite a few questions flowing in now. I'll try to sort through them by category, but Cameron, your emissions that you spoke about, are those based on location or are those sort of generic or using eGrid values? Can you kind of drill down a little bit in terms of the source for that data?
Yeah, so a lot of our data is utility driven. So that's there's part assumption there, and then there's part data that we're taking from. So there isn't 100% accuracy as far as emission standards are concerned, but there is data sources that are pretty reliable in the fact that we take from utility data.
Quite a few questions here for you, Patrick. We've got, I'm going to just sort of bundle them together. So I think you answered some of these as well already, but the entity you expect will be the eRIN generator. I think you talked to that, but if there's anything you want to add to that. And how do you expect those eRINs, once they are available, to impact the existing RIN pricing that's out there?
So yeah, you have every entity that registers. So you have to register the whole project from the production of the fuel to the use of it in vehicles. And that group gets to choose which entity generates the RINs, in this case, eRINs. And it's usually the entity that registers. So it's usually more on the production side, but then internally among that group, there's usually a negotiation in terms of how revenue might be split between different partners, and that's just internal to every project. With regard to existing RIN values, I think the key is to have eRINs produced at the same time or very similar time to when the renewable volume obligations are set by EPA. And the RVO is basically the demand side of this market-based program. So if you think of the biogas and the electricity or the hydrogen as the supply, I think of the RVO as the demand. And we want to make sure that the demand is increased at the same time that new production is coming. So demand increases and supply increases so that things don't flip-flop and then credit values tanks. But even if that were to happen, it would really only probably last for a couple of months, and then things would reset once the RVOs were adjusted upwards. But EPA knows that they need to do both of those together. The other impact that eRINs can have on RIN prices is really positive because, if you have, we've had some issues where small refinery exemptions and other things that have happened politically have kept the people who buy RINs, the oil and gas companies basically, from buying those RINs. And with a smaller program, every time one entity decides to not buy them or something happens politically, there can be more volatility in a smaller program. We're basically talking about doubling the size of the program. So that means more volume, which should isolate specific decisions and specific actors from having as big of an impact. And that should create more price stability. And with more price stability and more people participating, price values should continue to stay strong.
And just to clarify, eRINs will be generated from biogas sources. Are there any other sources that will participate in this program, such as renewable, PV, wind, or other renewables?
So the Renewable Fuel Standard was originally a corn ethanol-based program. It was generally designed to replace MTBE. So in a very generic sense, it is a biomass-based program. So no solar to EV, no wind to EV. That's not what the Renewable Fuel Standard is about. But there is a pathway application in to go from woody biomass electricity. So think about using like the leftover bits from producing furniture or other logging operations and turning that into electricity or biomass power. But there's an application in to allow that to participate. It hasn't been approved yet, but since that's biomass based, that may and hopefully will be an additional pathway that will exist.
Okay, great. Paul and JC, maybe you can touch on this question. What challenges would an operator possibly experience in terms of working with the utility on the electric demand that will be required for EV charging? So we're starting to expand beyond a handful of stations. Will you need upgrades to the utility, and what experience can you offer in terms of how to approach that with the utility?
Sure, I can take that one. The utilities really are gearing up right now to electrification of transportation. Many have, and others are watching, the ones that do have something called a Make Ready program. And that's where they go ahead and bring in power up from the vault or down from the pole and supply a transformer, supply a subpanel, and actually run the conduit and copper all the way out into the parking area. And they pay for that. So that is something that these utilities are already doing successfully in places like Massachusetts and New York. And utilities are now saying that the electrification of transportation is bigger than when air conditioning came.
I don't know if that takes into account Arizona though, where air conditioning is pretty important here, but but yeah, no, I almost guarantee you're going to need more power. I mean, at least that's what we run into, is all of everything is tapped out, so we almost always need more power. And like you said, the utilities have been really happy to work with you. I wish the utilities were paying as much as they were doing out there at the East Coast, because yeah, we're having to do all that on our own, but they still will work with you and kind of get the power you need, because I think that's what we thought as, oh yeah, we've got an extra electrical panel, but that extra electrical panel wasn't attached to anything. So we had to run more power to that panel and then we could get going again. So you'll definitely need more power. I can promise you that.
Okay. What kind of lead time does that bring into a project once you need the utility to start adding power?
It depends. Sometimes it's fairly quick, and then sometimes it can take a while depending on where the utility's at, what projects they're working on, and those types of things. So we've had to go both ways.
Yeah. A couple questions here about other types of charging. You know, one megawatt truck chargers, and other types of DC fast charging. Can you any comments on that? Either the difficulty of starting to install these larger chargers, or any advice in terms of how to roll that out? And Cameron, I know
Sure,
your
it's
database
just,
also works a lot with trucks and heavy duty as well.
yeah,
Go
they're
ahead,
hard to
Paul,
get
sorry.
these days. Everyone has tight supply lines on the high output DC. So number one, sign up early and plan on a major construction project, both on the utility side and just getting the product. But we clearly need it. And with the support that's coming from Washington, DC, everyone is building right now.
Great.
Yeah, I'd agree. Start now if that's what you're looking to do, because it will take a while, and it's a big infrastructure project. I don't think people realize how big it is when they charge that type of utility.
Okay. Cameron, does your grant database, does that get into the higher end chargers and the heavy duty vehicles?
Yeah. So again, the tool that I showed was California based. So obviously it's different per utility and state where you're at. But yes, it does talk about charging incentives and things of that nature.
Super. Well, thank you. I think we're reaching the top of our hour here, so I think this is a good point to wrap up. But if we didn't get to any questions in the box, we will respond via email to those, and we look forward to hopefully hearing from you and on your journey as you move to electrification and expansion. Thank you again to all of our panelists. This was a great wide array of different perspectives, and I think it's important to really consider all the different angles on an EV project as you move into this area.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, team.
Yeah, thanks
Patrick, for wearing ASU colors. Appreciate that.